Texting.
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 Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting. Texting. Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting.
Mark, Will, and Tomek present
Texting.
And we're live. Welcome to the first episode of Texting. I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
And I'm Tomek in Moscow.
Well, today we want to discuss William Shakespeare's Sonnet number 129. Before we do that, though, Tomek, I'd like to hear why Shakespeare matters to you. And you can answer as a writer, a teacher, a native speaker of English, or just as a person. Why should we care about Shakespeare?
Thanks for the question. I was on Wikipedia today doing some prep for the show today, and just kind of seeing how he's universally regarded as like potentially the greatest writer. And I think many people will cringe when someone has a crown like that, or we just naturally recoil when something is told to us rather than us experiencing it ourselves, experiencing that greatness. So every time I see a title like that proclaimed, I wonder, well, is it deserved? Is it earned? And on the other hand, I can honestly say that I've been incredibly moved by many of Shakespeare's plays, and I think he probably is deserving of that title, based on how prolific he was, by how unique he seems in terms of the genre of playwriting. I know we'll be discussing a sonnet today, so it's a bit different, but yeah, I think he's just someone I want to get deeper into. I've done the kind of standard stuff that someone who studies literature may experience. I've done a course on Shakespeare. I've been to the Globe Theater. I've seen his plays performed in different manners all around the world, set in different contexts. I've seen all the parts go to women and vice versa. I've seen Zulu Macbeth. But yeah, I admire the language, and I like the act of unpacking it, I would say. So yeah, what about you?
So the plays have been more inspirational to you than the poetry, the sonnets in particular?
Right, which is not to say that I haven't enjoyed my casual dabbings into the sonnets, but yeah, I've never had too many like wow moments with the sonnets, although hopefully we will be able to bring out the wow of Sonnet 129 today.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned the resistance that people feel to these figures that are, I don't know what we can say, lauded by the society or the entire world. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I, as a teenager, when I was first exposed to Shakespeare at school, I wanted nothing to do with it. I mean, like all of us in the English-speaking world, Shakespeare is. It was the same for me. Shakespeare was shoved down my throat like the Bible, and so right. I think there is a natural resistance to this kind of thing. You know, the people that I don't respect are telling me it's important and relevant. Well, I'm naturally going to assume that it's not important, mm-hmm. and that it's not relevant. So I think probably I was first forced to read Julius Caesar in high school, and I just had no interest in it whatsoever. So when did I become interested in Shakespeare? When did I become receptive to his work? I would say that it was when I was struggling to write songs as a 15 or 16-year-old. strumming my guitar and trying to come up with lyrics that I could sing. How do I make a song when I'm an illiterate product of the American public school system?
Yeah.
I can barely write my name, and I'm supposed to like compose lyrics to songs that I want to sing. So in addition to studying the Beatles and the Stones and Bob Dylan and so on, I began to look for other sources of inspiration. And in particular, there was a Sting album in the mid 80s called Nothing Like the Sun, which is an allusion to Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, the sonnet immediately after the one we're going to look at today. I remember in the liner notes he quoted the poem, and he talked about how it inspired a particular song on the album and the whole concept of the album. And I thought, wow, okay, so maybe I should look more closely at this Shakespeare. And he wrote not just plays, which are also poetry, but he wrote, lyric poetry, not dramatic poetry. Maybe I should look into this. Song lyrics are kind of like poetry, so maybe I should explore it for myself. So I went to the local bookstore, which at the time was B. Dalton. This is in the days before Barnes and Noble. And I found a beautiful hardcover edition of the Sonnets. I think it was called Sonnets of Love, which is I guess it's not completely inaccurate, but it's there's a little bit more to the sonnets than just the topic of love. But okay, Sonnets of Love by William Shakespeare. And then I began to methodically read all of them, from number 1 to 100, whatever. I forget how many there are.
Was this your first experience with poetry?
Pretty much. I mean, before that, it was just like song lyrics that I had tried to study and understand, or even paid attention to. So here I am trying to decipher the words of this archaic Elizabethan. Well, it's not archaic, but I mean it's still modern English. But for a child of the 20th century, it's not easy to understand and read. And there's a strange diction. There's the inversions of syntax and so on. It was a struggle, and so I remember I tried to read like 5 a day or 10 a day. And slowly
That's crazy.
build up.
I think more than one a day is quite a task.
Yeah, maybe I started with 1 in the beginning, but I do remember that I was able to, as I got more into the text, as I progressed and made my way through the text, I was able to read and understand more, and so I could do 2, 3, 5 a day. Maybe I never did 10 a day. Maybe I'm remembering that part wrong, but definitely I could just feel that I was entering that world. And of course I would have to read each one multiple times, and as we still do. But that was my first real exposure. As I say, maybe I had been assigned a play, but did I read it? Not really, or not with any real attention. So
okay, let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
So obviously this, not to age you, but this would have been, in a way, pre-internet as we know it. So.
Oh, for sure.
So you were approaching
mid '80s.
Right. So
mid '80s.
So what were you using as like aids to help you kind of get into these poems? Were you just using a dictionary or?
Dictionary. That's it.
Okay.
So, that's all I had. I had what would it have been? I remember very well. It was a big hardcover It was a blue cover, but I can't remember like who the publisher was. But that was it. I had the dictionary and I had the text, and I just had to figure it out. And I think it was around the same time that I started, like, in addition to trying to read one or two or however many sonnets per day, I was trying to build up my vocabulary. I was like learning as many new words in the English language that I could.
And
did
you have any kind of support system, or was this just like a completely solo endeavor?
No, it's completely autodidactic.
But I mean, like, if you come to school the next day and you were like hyped up about a sonnet you read, did you have someone to share the emotions with? Like, who would you?
No, not at all.
So
no, I mean, the only people. I mean, you know, I'm not sure I was still in school at this point. I'm a high school dropout, so
okay.
I may have already quit at that point. But if I was discussing it with anyone, it would have been like my bandmates. You know, like I had at that time, there was a guy that I was. We didn't usually collaborate when we were songwriting, but you know, we would bounce ideas off each other. So maybe I mentioned to him that I was looking for inspiration, you know, outside of the genre of pop music, or and it really sort of marked a departure for me. Like I got into literature through songwriting, but then literature sort of overtook my interest in songwriting, and I actually started trying to write sonnets of my own, and experimenting with other verse forms, and you know, put the guitar aside for a while. I went back to it later, but
what about
Shakespeare was
structural stuff like rhyme schemes and syllables? Did you learn about those, or?
I think at that time it was just intuitive. Like I could, as I read it, I would try to read them aloud, and you know, I could feel the rhythm. But that was before I learned all the technical terminology of iambic pentameter, and
right.
And of course I could feel the rhyme schemes. But you know, that's like song lyrics too. Like one line in verse 1 rhymes with another line, and lines in the choruses of songs rhyme, and so on. So that was all I could understand that intuitively or instinctively. But of course I that was a very important part of my experience, just the musicality of this poetry from, you know, basically 400 years before. And
can I ask, like, how vivid is your memory of maybe that first couple sonnets that you read? I mean, was it immediate that I'm enjoying this, I'm going to keep going?
Now, I think probably my first experience was, what the hell is this? What is he saying? I mean, how do I understand this? I'm sure I had to read it like 10 times, you know, before I had even the vaguest feeling of comprehension. I mean, again, you have to remember how young I was, and also how badly educated I was, you know.
And I don't think in your family, like, your parents weren't particularly, like, literarily inclined, right?
Well, I mean, apart from the Bible, no.
I mean, they weren't like Shakespeare enthusiasts or something.
No, not at all, not at all. I mean, they had you know, advanced degrees, and they were required to read a certain number of canonical texts, right? But of course, that was no part of their daily lives, and it wasn't really of any interest to them.
But what do you mean? So did they study literature or something? Sorry if we're getting on a tangent, but you said
no. I'm thinking of my mother. She has a master's in education, so of course she had to take some literature courses.
Okay.
My father studied mathematics, so less so, but I'm sure he had to take some some basic courses, right? Like
Right.
he had at some point in his education he had to read a Shakespearean play, but what I'm saying is no interest. Of course, if you ask them, they'd say, "Oh yes, he's great." Well, why is he great? They would have no answer to that. But the Bible was very much present in our home, and I was forced to go to church at that time, and I was exposed to it there. But in a way, that may have helped me, right? The King James Bible, which that the King James version of the Bible, that translation comes out of that same period, right? That's basically Elizabethan English. So having been exposed to that, I can sort of have a feeling of comprehension of Shakespeare, right? Some people even argue that Shakespeare may have contributed to, King James organizes a group of scholars to create this translation. I remember seeing something on TV long ago saying that maybe Shakespeare contributed something. He may have been involved in the translation. I don't think that's been proven, but he was around at that time.
Okay, interesting.
And it's not impossible. But anyway, it was a struggle, but I eventually came to appreciate the text very much, the whole collection, and in particular this sonnet number 129 that we're going to talk about today. Always felt that it was a powerful poem. And let me just read it now.
Great.
We'll just get into the text.
Okay.
So this is sonnet number 129 by William Shakespeare. The expense of spirit in a waste of shame is lust in action. And till action, lust is perjured, murderous, bloody, full of blame, savage, extreme, rude, cruel, not to trust, enjoyed no sooner but despised straight, past reason hunted, and no sooner had past reason hated, as a swallowed bait on purpose laid to make the taker mad. Mad in pursuit and in possession so, had, having, and in quest to have, extreme, a bliss in proof, and proved a very woe. Before, a joy proposed. Behind, a dream. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well to shun the heaven that leads men to this hell.
Yay, nice reading, Mark.
Okay, so we experienced the music of the poetry. Let's look at the technical aspects. A sonnet, as we know, is a poem of 14 lines. We can see that when we just look at the page. There are 14 lines of verse there, and that's true of a Shakespearean sonnet, a Spenserian sonnet, the type that Edmund Spenser, Shakespeare's contemporary, wrote. A little bit different structurally, and even to take a more modern example, the Nerudian sonnet in Spanish, of course, right? Neruda wrote 14-line poems as well. But when we're looking at the Shakespearean sonnet, we've got a very specific rhyme scheme, and of course the meter is iambic pentameter, right? It's 5 beats per line, and each beat is an unstressed followed by a stress. So da da. So one line, da 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 da. That was 5, right? So that's our iambic pentameter. So every line should fit into that rhythmic pattern.
With
although
many
sometimes
purposeful exceptions, right?
Sure. And at the end of the line, Shakespeare does this quite often. Not in 129. Those all scan like perfectly according to the pattern I just described. But sometimes you'll get da 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 little extra syllable there.
But like,
Not
for
in this
example,
one, as I say.
in the first line, like the expense of spirit, like the aren't those both unstressed?
Not as I scan it. I read it like this: the expense of spirit in a waste of shame.
Okay.
I mean, of course, we don't read it that way, but
Uh-huh.
but you can scan it like it's not the expense of spirit. There's a
The expense of spirit, yeah.
Right. There's an apostrophe there, right? Like, so it's TH apostrophe EX. So that's an unstressed syllable. The expense of spirit in a waste of shame.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's not important, but
Sure.
but I think with this particular poem, like, each line is 10 syllables. It's very, very clean. There's some enjambment. He continues one thought on the next line in a couple of spots here, but the rhythm,
Most notably in the
pretty
first
much-
lines, right?
yeah, and but I would say it follows like the iambic pentameter metronome or whatever. Like, you could easily fit it into that pattern. Of course, when you read it, it's a different matter. And it was only later that I learned, most of the plays are written in this same meter, blank verse,
Right.
unrhymed iambic pentameter. So that came later. But so the rhyme scheme, of course, we can hear and see the rhymes: A B A B, C D C D, E F E F, and then a concluding couplet, G G. So there are 3 quatrains with alternate lines that rhyme, and then a couplet at the end, 2 lines that rhyme. And the couplet, of course, sort of, it's a kind of summary or a kind of epigrammatic restatement of the content.
Right. I've heard it described as like almost like a truism stated. Right?
Yeah. And so this one in particular is just so beautifully constructed, quite apart from the content, which I also love. We can get into that. But
I hope so, yeah.
The construction of it is just, it's masterful. It's so... and I remember I could feel this even as a youth. I was quite impressed. So I started thinking, wow, this Shakespeare guy maybe he was onto something. Maybe he has something to offer me. Maybe I can use this in my songs. Maybe I can try to write a sonnet of my own. So it was very inspirational.
I mean, but this is Sonnet 129. So just to clarify, like, were you reading this book from 1 to... Because if so, you would have reached this pretty late in your reading, right?
Oh, yeah. That's why, by the time I got to this, I was more prepared, and I could understand it. Maybe I only had to read it 5 times instead of 10 or 20,
Right.
But sure. No, I did read them in order.
Okay.
The first time, for sure. So by the time I got to this, I had more. I felt like I was fluent in Shakespeare,
Right.
or at least I was developing fluency.
Sure,
I
sure.
understood a lot more than when I began with number 1.
Sure.
So what is your? How do you feel about this compared to, other sonnets? What does this one mean to you, or what's your
Sure.
reaction?
Well, I'm not well read enough in Shakespearean sonnets to kind of to compare it to like the larger oeuvre of Shakespeare sonnets. I'll just say that it was interesting for me to kind of speculate as to why you chose this particular sonnet, and I don't know how visceral we want to get in our discussion right now, but I think it could be fun if we kind of get a bit dirty with it.
Yeah.
So,
sure. I mean,
yeah.
what?
Okay,
you
so
say
I'm
you speculated.
Yeah.
What
So
were you wondering?
I'm beating around the bush a little bit. So let's just jump into the main topic of the poem, which is lust, and there's a poem about raging lust, insane lust, and to some extent, I feel like that matches my perception of you, someone who has like this really intense lust for various things. So it didn't come as an entire shock that you chose this poem,
For various things, such as?
Well, the obvious, which would be the sex act, which is also, I would say, the most outward, explicit reading of this poem. But of course, you're someone who's just like desperately trying to suck the marrow out of life.
I was thinking lust for life. I'm surprised you took it in that erotic, sexual direction. That was.
Are you being facetious or no?
That was the farthest thing from my mind.
Especially as a 16-year-old, right?
Yeah, exactly.
No, but yeah, I mean, I think that I'm sure that this. I guess I'm saying that as well because I don't feel that same. I feel different. I feel different emotions, but I don't necessarily feel like that. That lust in me is as strong. Okay.
Yeah.
So I assume it's something that you've had to deal with as a source of like tension, I would say, right?
Well,
and so maybe that's why it resonates.
I'll tell you what interested me about this, when I first read it, and then over the years as I've read it, it seemed to contradict the sanitized image that the culture wants to present of Shakespeare, the great author, Why is he great? Oh, because he talked about all the human emotions, and he's just so poetic, and all of these sweet, nice, wonderful things that he described in beautiful language.
Like flowery.
But I remember reading this. I'm like, whoa, he's talking about real shit here. Mm-hmm. Lust in action. Wait, that's Shakespeare?
Right.
Shakespeare, the guy that they shoved down our throat at school? Oh, they don't assign this poem in school, do they? You don't hear about this one. Why didn't they tell us about this one? If they taught this and explained this and asked us to analyze this, maybe I'd be like, oh, well, this is something I can relate to. Lust in action.
It's just funny, just to interrupt you for a second. So I was watching a YouTube channel. I think her name was like 6-Minute Explanations or something like that. Discuss the poem. And actually, to be fair to her, she's a professor and she did a great job. I was impressed with her. But the way that she would kind of delicately allude to sex, to her credit, she was using the word sex and she used it repeatedly. But it's like every time she said it, there was this tint of guilt, or like I should, so it's like, yeah.
Yeah, because that's, in the academy and in official venues, we're not supposed to talk about this, or we're not supposed to associate the great man William Shakespeare with such crass, earthy, fundamental drives. I mean, another example, which I didn't discover until later, was some of the rants of King Lear. The fit you nor the soiled horse goes to it with a more riotous appetite. Down from the waist they are centaurs, though women all above. I was like, what? He said that? Wait, Shakespeare? The guy that they tell us at school is so much a representative of our great Anglo-American culture.
I want to push back though a little bit, Mark, because if we think about like the outstanding literary personages, wouldn't you say that all of them do have that quality where they
of course
they transcend that clean and flowery accusation.
Of course.
Yeah,
of
so
course, which is the,
so maybe
which
you were
is the
being a bit
only
unfair.
reason.
Is my point, though. Maybe you're being a bit unfair on your perception of what mainstream culture was telling you. I mean,
No, that's not impossible, but that I feel like that was certainly the view that was promoted. Like I said, it's along with the Bible and Greek and Roman classics. Like
maybe
we're
that's
not-
also America, though, because I feel like Britain is very. I mean, British students and British people are like aware of that other side to Shakespeare. You know, I think it's like.
Well, I don't doubt that. I
Yeah.
don't doubt that. I mean, I'm sure. Like, it's not possible that the British school system, public or private, could be worse than the American one. That's just inconceivable. It couldn't possibly be.
And you can't
So
really get anywhere with Shakespeare without encountering some of this stuff. I mean, you read Romeo and Juliet, you're getting a lot of steamy stuff already, right?
I agree, and it was there also in Julius Caesar, as I discovered later. But
Right.
I wasn't interested because it
But
was
I still
not
get it, yeah.
presented. It wasn't presented as something relevant to me and my life. It
Yeah.
was just It was just another aspect of the repressive educational system. You know, this is important. Study it. Regurgitate the nonsense that we tell you, so you can get a good grade, and then get into a good college, and then get a good job and make babies so that they can go fight for the country.
And I hear you. I just think, and this reminds me of like a repeated kind of theme in our like discussions about our past educational experiences, because my high school teachers were my favorite adults in my life at that time. My high school English
Right.
teachers, I should
Right,
definitely,
right.
and they were those rebel figures.
Yeah.
So I'm
Well,
just saying,
that, that may be the difference between, Arizona and Texas. I don't know.
or my particular school. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that could go into that.
Sure,
right?
sure, exactly. And maybe I wasn't the most open to that anyway. Even if there was a teacher who could have inspired me, I didn't care. I wasn't interested.
Yeah, yeah.
I was taking drugs and listening to music like
Mm-hmm.
that. Whatever was going on at school was the least of my concerns. I didn't want to know. I didn't care.
Either way,
Nonsense had nothing to do with me.
The main thing is your mind was blown once you realized the contents of Shakespeare's work.
I would have to say yes. I mean, that was the beginning of it. These sonnets,
Mm-hmm.
and not maybe as you say, before I got to 129. No, maybe for sure there were others that affected me, but this one has always been one of my favorites. I mean, yeah, we can speculate on why, but I think that probably has something to do with it. Let me just say, as a writer of books that are sometimes considered transgressive. I mean, I often write literary fiction, but it is a lot of it could be considered transgressive. This, to me, is in a way a transgressive poem from the Elizabethan period.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is real shit. Like he's really expressing something that is typically not discussed in polite society.
I agree, but I also want to like push back again just to kind of complicate our reading. So, in terms of the primary subject matter being lust, absolutely agree. But where I want to push back is just this idea that of like the shame that and the regret that is tied into lust, which in a way you could say makes this a moralistic poem.
Well, that's that's something that I was thinking about as I reread this, like waste of shame. Why is it shameful? I mean, it's almost like puritanical. It's almost
Exactly.
like something. It's almost like something Milton could have written a few years later, you know? Like, what's shameful about it? Will Shakespeare, why do you say that? But, you know, at various times in my life, I've experienced that, and I know what he means. And there's, again, and you can apply it to other things besides simply sex. You can, in any sort of thing that we really want, when we get it, you know, we have that feeling. Before, a joy proposed. Behind, a dream. Or the line before that, a bliss in proof. And proved, a very woe.
Right.
I mean, when we get the things we want, there's always some kind of dissatisfaction. And all this the world knows.
I think that there are huge gradients, though, right? I mean, if we're talking about the feeling of satisfaction that we felt, not to make this about us, but like on publishing a magazine, you know, it didn't feel like behind a dream or a very woe. Whereas like the feeling you get maybe after like a drunken experience with a woman that you didn't necessarily want to hook up with, that you got to deal with the next day.
I don't know what you mean. I've never experienced that.
But either way, so that I would say
ahead.
that speaks a lot. That speaks more directly to what I think this poem is saying, right?
Well, I agree, but I would argue that there is, even when we consider these achievements, like you mentioned, publication of a magazine or publication of a new book, or you know, completing the composition of a new song or recording a new song, mixing and mastering it, there is always, for me, a slight feeling of dissatisfaction. Like I could have done that better in some way. I mean, I always get to the point where, okay, this is done. It is what it is. Let me put it out into the world. But I often feel, I think always, I feel there's a kind of wistfulness, like, you know, that's not. I had this brilliant ideal as I was creating this thing, whatever it is. And when I finished, it just became a real thing in the world. And there's a sadness to that, I feel.
I think that's very valid reading. I guess I would just still want to differentiate between the act of creation, what you're talking about, because if we look at the first lines of the poem, the expense of spirit in a waste of shame is lust in action. Like the expense of spirit, like the expense of life energy. Because in a way, Shakespeare might be warning people, right? Like your energy is better sourced, it's precious life energy, and is better sourced not on the pursuit of lust. So I mean, I'm just saying, I don't know that Shakespeare would agree that the creative process of writing a sonnet, for example, he would categorize in terms of like the lust that he's speaking about here.
Well, we can talk about Shakespeare and what he may or may not have intended, if we can even decide who Shakespeare was. But I would just say we can read this however we want, you know, like I agree, you know, the sexual component is obvious, and I've admitted that because that's what initially attracted me to this, right? And that's so, of course, I'm not going to deny that reading. But, you know, don't we expend spirit when we create things? Of course we do. We put our heart and our soul into our writing or our Substack post or our podcast or our song or whatever.
Yeah,
you know,
but enjoyed no sooner but despised it straight. You know, like
I feel that. Sometimes I feel that like this was great when I was doing it, but now it's just kind of a thing that's out there in the world. Look, I'm not arguing that this is not primarily about sex.
Sure,
not at all.
Sure.
I'm just saying that to limit it to that is missing something. I mean,
I
just
agree.
to reemphasize the sexual aspect, I remember reading a commentary. This was much later. Someone focused on the word waste in line 1, W-A-S-T-E, right? And said, actually, this is a pun on W-A-I-S-T.
I heard
right?
that too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's very valid. And then, the expense of spirit reminds me of like semen retention. You've heard about this, right?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah,
I thought
like,
about that
like,
too.
Yeah. Like if you ejaculate your as a male, you're losing your chi, your energy, your what would the Hindu term for that be? I'm thinking of the Chinese chi.
No, but
or
I've heard
energy.
people like believe in that religiously.
Well, yes, it's a very valid consideration. Like there's the Latin phrase which is translated, after sex every animal is sad, right? Post coitum om nanimal triste. You've heard that?
No.
Or maybe not. But there is something to that.
I also heard like the pun on the words, possibly we should say, in a bliss and proof and proved a very woe. I've heard that woe can refer to like woman, as in like woman.
Interesting.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
And I also, in the last line, I messaged you about this yesterday, but I didn't want to get too far into it before we talked today. But in the last couplet, all this the world well knows, and so well meaning like also could be like the woman's body part, and knows.
How delicate.
Yeah, and knows
the female member.
Yeah, the female member. the castrated member, the never fully bloomed.
No,
member.
you're trying to get us canceled now.
Anyway,
But
so
carry
all
on.
this the world well knows, and know again being like the biblical way to describe sex, right? You know someone.
Yes.
So,
True.
but the only thing I didn't get was, and again, I'm stealing some of this, so I should give this lovely lady credit. But the thing I didn't get is she said that all can be a reference to the male part, and I was wondering and then I was trying to like search online, and I couldn't figure out how all could be like the dick, and then the well be the pussy. So, there you go. I threw it out there for you.
Well,
any ideas how all could be?
I said well. Yeah, I saw the text. I thought you said all was a euphemism for sex itself, not the male member.
No, it's supposed to be like the male member.
Okay. Well,
like an old way to refer
know.
to it.
I don't know. I'd have to think about that. But I'm looking at the line now. I just noticed that well is repeated in that penultimate line, the first line of the couplet. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well. I hadn't noticed that before. Not that I don't know the significance of that, but that's if we're playing on if well is also the vagina.
Which words are you gonna pick, folks?
No, actually, look at that. There's an ABBA pattern. All this the world well knows, yet none knows well. Well knows well.
Yeah.
I hadn't noticed that inversion before, or hadn't focused on it. So yeah, knowing in the what they call the biblical sense, right? He had carnal knowledge of her, or
right.
she of him, or he of him, or she of her,
right,
or they of them, to use all the correct pronouns, I think. Yeah, so I don't know where that leaves us, but I wanted to mention one other thing. In the sonnets, there is, and I don't have the numbers with me. I don't have them at hand here. Could look them up quickly, but there are a certain number of sonnets that play on the name Will. My name is Will, he explicitly says in one, right? Will Shakespeare. And this always interested me because ultimately I chose that as my pen name, right? Mark Will. So Mark Will is Mark Twain plus Will Shakespeare and maybe Schopenhauer's world as will and representation. But there are I think 3, possibly 4 sonnets that play on this name will and the various meanings of will, right? Which leads me to a question I wanted to ask. What is your opinion about the identity of Shakespeare? You know, there's a theory. The theory is that Will Shakespeare, the actor, is not the author of the plays and the sonnets. Most people who subscribe to this theory suggest that it was the Earl of Oxford, and this is the view put forward in the movie Anonymous, featuring Derek Jacobi. Apparently, John Gielgud, the famous Shakespearean actor, also subscribed to this theory. So it's there are quite a few supporters. There are people that say, including, we mentioned Mark Twain earlier. He was an early proponent of this idea. He didn't believe it at all. I think he believed it was the Earl of Oxford. Other people said, oh, it was Francis Bacon.
I've always heard Christopher Marlowe.
In the movie Anonymous, that too. That's another possibility. Yeah, and yeah, people have said, like, Marlowe worked. We know that Marlowe was a spy for the British government,
for the Russians,
and so this is why Shakespeare's. Yeah, of course, he was a Putin puppet, and so before there was a Putin, he was an Ivan the Terrible puppet.
Yeah,
but and so this is why Shakespeare's plays, many of them are set in Italy, because Christopher Marlowe went over there doing some spying for Her Majesty and familiarized himself with the culture, and then stole all of these Italian stories and put them into blank verse and made dramas out of them. Yeah, that's another. Marlowe, Francis Bacon, the Earl of Oxford. So all of these things have been suggested, but
the Earl of
movie
Sandwich.
I'm talking about, Anonymous, with Derek Jacobi. Yeah, the Earl of Sandwich.
I'm sorry.
Put his meat between two slices of bread.
Between two couplets.
So, yeah, all this the world well knows. And so you're making me lose my train of thought here. Okay. So yeah, the movie Anonymous, the background is that actually it was the Earl of Oxford. But I think because he was an aristocrat, or because he had connections at court, he didn't want to be identified as the author, so they just let this actor, who is depicted as like a buffoonish drunkard, but a successful actor and the owner of the Globe Theater, he was given the official credit, but in fact he didn't write any of the plays or the sonnets, according to this theory. So you've heard something about it. What's your feeling about it?
I'm not super. I don't know. I'm not enough of an expert to have any kind of like strong opinion on it, but my instinctive reaction is like it's a distraction, basically, from why exercise energy on that? Like, let's focus on the text is kind of like which is not to judge anyone who wants to explore that, and it may, but I personally haven't like felt a passionate desire to like uncover the truth. Like I'm just excited by the text, and they're all dead anyway, right? So let's focus on the text.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, maybe they were written by committee, like people say the Iliad and the Odyssey were, right? Like it was really a collection of bards that over the years worked on this text. It wasn't Mr. Homer who sat down and wrote it all in Greek.
Right, but although
pristine, perfect text was transmitted to us.
But in the case of Shakespeare, that I don't think it probably
Yeah.
wasn't committee, right? I mean, it was like, yeah, it doesn't seem like the kind of thing, like we know the reasons why. I mean, I definitely understand why Homer is more
Who
like
knows?
a mythical creature.
Why not? Yeah, but to take a more modern example, I think some Brechtian scholars have said that, the plays that we have, that we now consider to have been written by Bertolt Brecht, the great dramatist and poet, which he certainly was, but a lot of his plays were the result of collaboration. We know that they underwent many revisions. I mean, is it so difficult to imagine that some of the members of the Berliner ensemble contributed something to the final text that we have now? I think that's quite possible. And if think of a movie script, right? Like do not actors sometimes contribute to rewrites?
No, I mean, or even like think about different sculptors, right?
On the screenplay.
Like a sculptor would have a workshop, right?
Sure,
and then he
or
just kind of he just gets someone to do everything, and then he comes in and maybe does the final flourish and puts his name on it.
Yeah.
Or he designs his own signature style.
That goes on now.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean,
I still basically though I can't.
Warhol called his studio the factory.
Right. I still think though that it doesn't excite me that this branch of scholarship. Like I don't know. What about you? You don't have that same kind of recoil?
I'm not invested in it. I think it's interesting the reaction of certain scholars who completely dismiss it, the Stratfordians as they're called, like why are you so emotionally invested in it? What does it matter?
That's true.
But, on the flip side people say, oh, so what? An uneducated actor with little Latin and less Greek, as Ben Jonson said, he's not capable of writing these masterpieces? That sounds like a classist argument. Like, oh, only the elite aristocrats are capable of such brilliant compositions. I mean, that's an argument on the other side that I'm certainly sympathetic to. But basically, I agree with you. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm not emotionally invested in it. Like, what does it matter? We've got this. Whoever wrote it, it's beautiful. Maybe a woman wrote it. Maybe a trans person wrote it. We have the language.
To be honest, like, just for my own personal interests,
we have the text because we're texting.
Yeah, I just want to say, like, I'm more excited in a way. Again, this is just in like Shakespeare's sexuality. Like that's just my own thing. Like I'm interested in, the fact that a lot of these sonnets are addressed to a man, right? Or like that's just. I like to imagine that Shakespeare was very bisexual. I feel like that just kind of would make him a more. I don't know. For some reason, I like that idea.
Of course, I'm not opposed to that idea. However, I think the male that is being addressed in a lot of the sonnets, I think many people have assumed that is like a son, a child of the author, but who knows? I mean, who is the dark lady, the so-called dark lady of the sonnets? Who is that? Is that Anne Hathaway, to whom he gave his second best bed in his will? Or is it someone else? My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun? That doesn't sound like a wife. Who was it? We don't know.
Yeah. It's just fun to imagine that he was breaking conventions in every way, right? Not only in the subject matter, but in his attitude towards sexuality and so on.
That's certainly possible. I mean, have you seen the Tom Stoppard play or the movie based on the play Shakespeare in Love?
I think I saw Shakespeare in Love years ago, but I think I was making out with a girl that night and wasn't paying too much attention. Sorry, Liliana. You didn't hear that. You didn't get to this part in the podcast.
Okay. Well, that's
no other woman before you.
I was saying Tom Stoppard, I like the way he's played with the Shakespearean myth. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead, and as I say, Shakespeare in love. My position basically is not what is the truth, but how can we play with these texts? How can we take his texts and make texts of our own?
Texting.